put her in the blue drawing room and see that the key turns twice. The voice came through the paneled door in a whisper, meant to travel no further than the two who shared it, and Isolde Vane, standing very still on the cold side of that door, with a footman's hand closed hard about her wrist, heard every word of it as clearly as if it had been spoken against her ear. By sunrise, the whole of the county will know she spent the night alone with a man. After that, no one will take her, and the estate falls where it should have fallen years ago. She did not scream. That was the first thing, and in the long, strange night that came after she would remember it as the thing that saved her. She did not scream, and she did not wrench her arm from the footman's grip, nor did she beg. She stood in the drafty passage of Harrogate House, with the single candle guttering in the sconce above her, and she looked at the closed door, and she understood in one clean, cold stroke exactly what her cousins had bought and exactly what it was meant to cost her. "You need not hold me so tightly," she said to the footman. Her voice did not shake. She had learned long ago to keep it level. A level voice was one of the few things in the world that had never yet been taken from her. "I am not going to run. Where would I run to at this hour, dressed for a supper I was never truly invited to?" The footman, a broad young man named Corliss, who had carried coal to her grate on winter mornings for 6 years, and had never once met her eye now, and looked away from it just as quickly. "I'm sorry, miss," he muttered. "It's only that they've promised me a place. A good place. In London." "I know what they have promised you," Isolde said. "I heard it. £30 and a place in a London house to turn a key on your master's niece and leave her to be ruined. It is a great deal of money for a lock, Corliss. I hope you will find it buys you a good night's sleep." He flinched, which was something, and he opened the door, which was everything, and he put her through it into the dark, with a gentleness that shamed neither of them enough to stop him. The door closed. The key turned. Then, as her aunt had instructed, it turned a second time, and the small brass tongue of it slid home with a sound that Isolde felt in the roots of her teeth. And then there was silence and blackness so complete that she could not see her own hand when she lifted it before her face. She was 23 years old, an orphan of 11 years standing, and she had spent the whole of them in this house that was hers by right and no one else's, learning that the right of a thing and the possession of it are not at all the same. A girl of 12 cannot manage an estate, and so her uncle had come to manage it, and his wife and daughters with him, and somewhere in the years between the reading of her father's will and this night in the dark, the house had quietly stopped being hers and started being theirs, and everyone in it had agreed to pretend they did not remember whose it truly was. The drawing room was cold. No fire had been laid. That was deliberate, she understood, for a cold hearth in a locked room would make the whole thing look worse in the morning, more furtive, more arranged, which of course it was. She moved by memory through the black until her fingers found the tall back of the wing chair by the shuttered window, and she stood with her palm flat against the worn brocade and made herself breathe slowly, counting the breaths as she counted them on the nights she could not sleep. She was not alone in the room. She had known it from the moment the door closed. There is a particular quality to the silence of a room that holds another living person in it, a weight to the darkness, a sense of a second breath pacing itself against your own, and Isolde had felt that weight settle over her the instant the lock turned twice. Somewhere across the black room, near the dead hearth, a man was sitting. And he hadn't moved, and he hadn't spoken. And the very stillness of him told her that he had been placed here exactly as she had been placed here, and that he had heard the whispered instruction through the door, precisely as she had. "You may as well speak," Isolde said into the dark. "I know you are there. I have known since I came in. And I promise you, sir, whatever you have been paid to do to me tonight, I would sooner pass the hours in honest conversation than in pretending I am alone with my own ruin." For a long moment nothing answered her but the wind, worrying at the shutters. She counted it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, and then, from the darkness by the cold hearth, a man's voice, low and unhurried and edged with something that was not quite amusement and not quite anger, but somewhere in the cold country between the two, said, "You are remarkably composed for a woman who has just been sold." "I have had a good deal of practice at being sold, sir," she answered, dry as ash. "This is only the first time anyone has bothered to lock the door afterward." There was a silence. And then, of all the things in the world she had not expected, there came from across the room the sound of a man beginning, very quietly, to laugh. It was not a cruel laugh. She had heard cruel laughter. Her cousins had schooled her in every register of it. This was something startled out of him, low and rough and genuine, the laugh of a man who has been surprised, and who is not accustomed to being surprised, and who is not entirely certain he cares for the sensation. It stopped almost as soon as it began, as though he had caught it and put it away. "Tell me your name," he said. "You do not know it? Then you were not told a great deal for your money. I am Isolde Vane. This is my house, though you would not know it to look at how I am kept in it. And you, sir? What is a gentleman paid to ruin a woman he has never met?" "I was told," the voice said slowly, and now there was something careful in it, something that made her turn her head toward the sound, though she could see nothing, "that I would be shown to a warm room and given good brandy and left to my own devices for the night, and that in the morning I need only present myself as a witness to my own presence, and a certain arrangement of debts would be forgiven. I confess the brandy has not appeared, and the room is far from warm, and no one mentioned that the other occupant of it would be a woman who talks like the hero of a tragedy." He paused. "They were very careful not to tell me your name. Now I begin to understand why." "Do you?" said Isolde. "Then you have the advantage of me, for I understand almost nothing, except that my aunt and uncle wish me disgraced past marrying so that my estate stays in their hands, and that they have hired you to be the instrument of it. I do not even know what to call you." Another silence, longer than the first. She counted it 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It had lost its lazy edge and gone very quiet and very level, and she thought, absurdly, that it was the voice of a man arranging pieces on a board. "You may call me nothing at all. For the present," he said. "That is safer for both of us. But I will tell you this, Miss Vane, because you have earned it by not weeping, which I confess I expected. I was not hired to ruin you. I was hired by a man who believes he hired me. And he has made, tonight, the single greatest mistake of a life that has been, I assure you, richly furnished with them." She heard then the scrape of a boot on the floorboards, and the soft complaint of a chair as a large man rose out of it, and the deliberate, unhurried footsteps of someone crossing a room he could not see any better than she could. And then she heard a small sound she knew, a sound from her childhood, the dry rasp of a sulphur match drawn across the rough iron of the tinderbox on the mantel. "There is one thing I have always found true of the dark," the man said, and his voice was close now, closer than she had thought. No more than a few feet from where she stood with her hand still pressed to the back of the wing chair. "It makes people say what they truly mean, because they believe no one can see their faces. Your aunt said a great deal. On the other side of that door, I heard all of it. Every word." The match rasped again. "Shall we have a little light, Miss Vane, and see one another properly? I think it is past time." The match flared. For an instant the small flame showed her nothing but itself, a hard, bright point that swam and dazzled in eyes grown used to blackness. Then it steadied, and the room resolved around it in a wash of trembling gold. The shuttered window, the cold, gray hearth, the tall shapes of the furniture crouched in shadow. And in the center of that small light, holding the match cupped in one broad hand so that the glow of it lit his face from below, stood the man they had locked her in with. She had seen him once before, at a distance, at the great review last summer when he had ridden through on his black horse, with the whole crowd falling silent as he passed. And someone at her elbow had breathed his name in the tone people use for weather and disaster. He stood an arm's length from her now, tall enough that he had to stoop under the low beam by the hearth. Dark hair swept back from a hard, clean brow, a faint old scar breaking the line of one eyebrow, and eyes the color of a storm coming in off the sea, fixed on her face with an attention so complete that she felt it like a hand laid flat against her breastbone. "You," she said, and for the first time that night her level voice failed her, and the word came out on a breath she had not meant to let go. "You are the Duke of Ashworth." "I am," said the Duke. "And your aunt, Miss Vane, has just paid 3 servants and one very foolish attorney a small fortune to lock her orphaned niece into a dark room for the night with the most powerful man in the county, in the belief that he was a hired scoundrel who would ruin her by dawn." The match had burned down nearly to his fingers. He looked at it and then at her, and something moved behind the storm gray of his eyes, something that was not cold at all. "I find I am inclined to disappoint her." The match died. Darkness rushed back into the room, and Isolde heard him move, heard the scrape and rasp again. And this time, it was not a match he lit, but the stub of a candle he must have carried in his coat, for a steadier flame rose between them, and he set it in the empty holder on the mantel, and the small light held. "How came you to be here at all?" she asked. It seemed suddenly the most important question in the world, more important even than what would become of her by morning. Dukes are not hired out of taverns for the ruining of country girls. Someone brought you? Someone who did not know who you were? "Someone who thought he did," Ashworth said. He had drawn back a little from the candle and stood now with one shoulder against the cold marble of the chimney-piece, watching her with that unsettling stillness. "A month passed. A man came to me at my club in town. He did not come to me directly. He had not the standing for that. He came through a friend of a friend, in the way that men who wish to hire something disgraceful always do. He wanted, he said, a gentleman of no particular scruple and considerable discretion to assist in the settling of a family matter. He was told I might be persuaded. He was told wrong, but I confess my curiosity was engaged, and so I let him believe he had found his scoundrel, and I asked him what the matter was. And do you know what he said to me, Miss Vane?" "I imagine I do," said Isolde. "He said there was a girl." "He said there was a girl," the Duke agreed, "who stood between him and an inheritance that ought by rights to be his. He said she was proud and cold and unnatural, that she had refused every decent offer made her, that she meant to sell the estate out from under the family that had raised her the moment she came of full age, and could do it. He said that if only she could be made unmarriageable, made a thing no respectable man would touch, then she would have no choice but to remain a dependent in the house forever, and the management of the place would stay where it had always been. He was very persuasive. He wept a little, I think, over his brandy. He described a scheming creature with no heart in her." Ashworth's gaze did not leave her face. "I have been sitting in the dark of this room for an hour, listening to that creature refuse to weep and speak kindly to the frightened boy who locked her in, and it is plain to me now that I was sold a portrait that bears no resemblance to its subject. Tell me, was any of it true?" "Which part?" Isolde asked. She had not moved from the wing chair. She kept her hand upon it still, as though it were the one solid thing in a night that had come loose from its moorings. "That I am proud? Perhaps I am. Pride is what is left to a woman when everything else has been taken from her one careful piece at a time. It costs nothing, and no one can spend it but herself. That I refused offers, I refused too. Both were made by men my uncle chose, and both of those men were promised a portion of my land as the price of taking me. And I would not be sold like a mare with a field tied to her tail. That I mean to sell the estate?" And here her level voice sharpened, just for a moment, into something with an edge on it. "I would sooner burn it. It is all my father left me, the one thing in the world that is mine. I have spent 11 years being told in 1,000 small ways that I am a guest in my own house, an inconvenience to be housed and fed until a use can be found for me, and every acre of Harrogate is a promise my father made me that he would come home, and he never did, and the land is all I have of him. Sell it? No, but hear what is true, your grace, since you have asked me plainly, and I am too tired tonight for anything but plainness. It is true that they are afraid of me, not of anything I have done, of the calendar. In 109 days I turn 24, and on that day, by the terms of my father's will, the full management of the estate passes out of my uncle's hands and into mine, and every shilling of the income he has been drawing from it these 11 years becomes mine to account for. That is the girl your man described to you. That is the monster. A woman with a birthday." The Duke was silent for a moment. The candle flame stood straight up between them in the still cold air. 109 days, he said. "That is the sum of it," said Isolde. "And a night besides. They have been so patient. I used to wonder why they never simply turned me out, or arranged some accident on the stairs. My aunt has the imagination for it. But an orphan turned out or dead is a scandal, and scandals draw attorneys, and attorneys read wills. A niece disgraced is only sad. No one investigates a ruined woman, your grace. They only cross the street." She lifted her chin. "So, now you know all of it. You know what you were hired to do and what it was for. The question that remains is what you mean to do instead, and I would be grateful if you would tell me quickly, because I have been standing in a cold room being brave for a very long time, and I am not certain how much longer I can manage it." And at the small crack that finally showed in her, Ashworth did a thing that surprised them both. He crossed the space between them and took off his own coat, the fine dark coat with the antique gold braid at the collar and settled it about her shoulders. "You are shaking with the cold," he said low, "and I will not carry it on my conscience alongside everything else this house has done to you tonight. Take it. Do not argue." And he stepped back before she could refuse it or thank him. It was warm from his body, and it smelled of cold night air and horses and something clean underneath. And Isolde stood inside the great heavy weight of it and found, to her horror, that her eyes had filled. "Here is what I mean to do," Ashworth said. And he had turned away from her to give her the moment, and was looking at the shuttered window as though he could see through it to the dark grounds beyond. "But first you will sit down, and you will stop being brave, because there is no one here to be brave for but me, and I have seen enough of it tonight to last me the year. Sit, Miss Vane." He glanced back, and one corner of his hard mouth moved, not quite a smile. The ghost of the place a smile might one day stand. "It is your house. You said so yourself. I will not have it said that a duke kept the mistress of Harrogate standing in her own drawing room." She sat. She drew his coat close about her. The thumb of one hand pressed flat against the palm of the other, hard, so that the small pain of it would keep her from disgracing herself further. And she watched the most dangerous man in the county pace the length of her cold, dark room and think. "The trap they have laid," he said at last, "is a good one. I will give them that. It relies on the very rigidity of the world they live in. A woman found to have spent a night alone with a man is ruined, and no explanation, however true, will save her, because the world does not wish to be told the truth. It wishes to be scandalized. Your aunt understands this perfectly. She does not need the ruin to have happened. She needs only for it to be believable. In the morning the servants she has bought will swear you were locked in with a stranger. The stranger, she believes, will be a paid man with no name and no reason to contradict her, and the county will do the rest. By noon you will be unmarriageable, and unmarriageable you are harmless. When those few months have run, you will inherit an estate that no respectable neighbor will let his family visit, and a woman so situated does not sell land or make trouble. She grows old quietly in an upstairs room while others spend her rents. It is, I say again, a very good trap." He stopped and turned and looked at her, and the candlelight caught the storm gray of his eyes and made them for a moment almost silver. "It has only one flaw. Your aunt hired the wrong man to be the stranger. She reached into the dark for a scoundrel, and she caught a duke. And a duke, Miss Vane, is the one man in England whose word no county magistrate will contradict, and whose name, attached to a woman, does not ruin her at all." He paused. "It does something rather the opposite." Isolde went very still inside his coat. "I do not think," she said carefully, "that I understand you." "I think you understand me perfectly," said the Duke. "But you are too honest to say it aloud before I have, and that is to your credit. So I will say it. Let me be plain, since we are being plain tonight. Your aunt has arranged for you to be found in the morning, disgraced, beside a man. Very well. Let her have her morning. Let the servants come, and the neighbors, and let the door be opened. But let them find, instead of a nameless, ruined girl beside a paid scoundrel, the Duke himself on his feet, entirely composed, announcing that he came to Harrogate last evening on a private matter, that he has spent the night in conversation with Mrs. Isolde Vane, and that he has this morning asked for her hand and been accepted. There is no scandal in a betrothal, Miss Vane. There is only envy. And there is not a soul in this county who will dare so much as raise an eyebrow at a match that I choose to make." He let that settle, watching her. Your aunt would have made you unmarriageable. I propose to make you a duchess. I find the symmetry of it very satisfying." For a long moment Isolde did not speak at all. She sat in the great warm coat in the small gold light and looked at him, and when she found her voice again it was not the voice of a grateful woman. "No," she said. The Duke blinked. It was, she would learn later, one of the very few times in his adult life that a person had said that word to him and meant it, and she watched it land on him now with a kind of grim satisfaction, because a woman who has been told for 11 years that she has no choices takes a particular pleasure in discovering that she has at least the choice to refuse a duke. "I beg your pardon," he said. "You heard me quite well, Your Grace. You lit a match not 5 minutes ago and told me the dark makes people say what they mean. So I will say what I mean. No, I will not be married out of a rescue. I will not exchange one set of people arranging my life for their own reasons for another set of people arranging it for theirs, however kindly the second set may be dressed. You are offering to save me, and I am grateful, truly I am, more grateful than I can say to a stranger who owed me nothing and gave me his coat in the cold. But you are offering to save me by marrying me, and a marriage made to spite my aunt is still a marriage I did not choose. I have been a thing that men trade and settle and dispose of since I was 12 years old. I would rather be ruined as a free woman than rescued as a chosen one, if the choosing is not mine to make." Her chin came up. "Do you understand me now, Your Grace?" There was a silence. And then the Duke did the second surprising thing of the night. He inclined his head to her, gravely as a man bows to an equal, and he said, "Yes, I understand you. And I ask your pardon. I have been arranging your future in your own drawing room exactly as everyone else does, and telling myself it was rescue, which is what everyone else tells themselves. That was ill done of me. Let me begin again." He drew the wing chair's twin from beside the hearth and set it down facing hers, and he sat, so that their eyes were level, and Isolde understood that this too was deliberate, that a man who habitually stood over people had chosen, for her, to sit. "I will not marry you against your wish, but the trap is real, Miss Vane, and morning is coming, whether we like it or not, and you cannot leave this room, for the door is locked twice on the far side, and the window is shuttered and barred against a lady's escape, which tells you they thought of that too. So, we have a night. Let us not spend it deciding your whole life. Let us spend it deciding only the morning. When that door opens, what would you have happen? Tell me what you want, and I will bend the whole of my not inconsiderable influence to getting it for you. And I will ask nothing in return. And if what you want is that I walk out of your life at dawn and never trouble it again, then that is what I will do." And Isolde Vane, who had not been asked what she wanted by a single soul in 11 years, found that she did not immediately know how to answer. "I want," she said slowly, "my house. I want the days between now and my birthday to pass, and I want to stand in my own hall on that morning and take the keys of it into my own hand, and I want my aunt and my uncle and my cousins gone from it, decently and without scandal, to live on their own means, which are not small. They have seen to that with my rents. I want to walk through the long gallery where my father's portrait hangs and know that no one can put me out of the room. I do not want a husband, Your Grace. I have never once, in all these years, dreamed of a husband. I have dreamed of a lock on my own door that only I hold the key to. That is the whole of my ambition. It is very small, I know, but it is mine." Ashworth was quiet a moment. "It is not small," he said. "It is the largest thing there is." I have 4 estates and a house in town and a seat in the Lords, and I would trade the lot of them for a single room I was certain no one could put me out of. Something crossed his face then, some old shadow, gone as quickly as it came. Very well. Then here is what I propose, and hear me to the end before you say no again, for you are quick with that word, and I have come to respect it. In the morning, when the door opens, I will not announce a betrothal. I will announce a betrothal that neither of us intends to keep. A public understanding, Miss Vane. A false engagement. To the county we are affianced. The Duke, having become acquainted with the mistress of Harrowgate, has offered for her and been accepted, and the wedding is set for some comfortable distance off, past your birthday, past midsummer, whenever you please. It costs you nothing but the wearing of a ring. It gives you everything. No scandal can touch a woman I am known to be marrying. Your aunt cannot cry ruin. For there is no ruin, she can only stand in her hall and watch her whole scheme turn to your advantage. And under the cover of an engagement, I have every right in the world to concern myself with your affairs, to call on you, to bring my own attorneys to bear on the reading of your father's will and the accounting of your uncle's stewardship, which I will wager my black horse has a hole in it you could drive a coach through. We hold the engagement precisely as long as it is useful to you. On the day you take your keys, if you wish it, we quarrel very publicly about the color of the drawing-room and part as friends. And the great man retires to lick his wounds, and you are left the free mistress of Harrowgate, unmarriageable to no one, having refused a duke, which I promise you is a thing that will do your consequence in this county nothing but good. He spread his hands. You keep your lock, you keep your key, and you owe me nothing, because I am not doing it for you. I am doing it because a small grasping man tried to make a scoundrel of me over his brandy, and I find I should like him to spend the rest of his life knowing exactly how badly it went. Now, what do you say? Isolde looked at him for a long time. I say, she said at last, that you are cleverer than the man who hired you deserved to meet, and that this is the first offer of marriage I have ever received that was arranged for my benefit rather than my land, even if it is a false one. And I say yes to the false engagement, your grace, on one condition. Name it. That it is honest between us, whatever face we show the world. That you never, in private, pretend to feel what you do not feel, and never ask me to. I can bear a great deal, but I cannot bear to be managed by a man who is kind to my face and laughing at me behind it. My cousins have taught me that particular flavor of misery very thoroughly. If we are to be liars to the whole of the county, then let us at least be the 2 people in it who tell each other the truth. Can you promise me that? That, said the Duke, and he held out his hand to her across the small space between the chairs, is the only promise I make easily. Yes, I promise it, the truth between us, always, whatever the county is told. She looked at his hand, the broad palm, the heavy gold signet ring catching the candlelight. And then Isolde Vane put her hand into it and felt his fingers close, warm, and sure about her cold ones, and something passed between them in the touch that neither of them named, because they had just agreed to name only true things, and neither of them yet knew a true name for that. They did not sleep. They talked in the small gold light until the candle guttered and Ashworth lit another from within his seemingly bottomless coat. You may ask me things, you know, he said. It is a very long night, and I find I would rather hear you talk than sit in silence being ruined. Tell me about him. Your father. You say his name as though it were a warm room. He had a great booming laugh, she said, and she was surprised to hear herself begin. He carried me on his shoulders through the long gallery and named each ancestor in a different silly voice until I wept with laughing. And then the winter I was 12 he took a fever, and he died, and the house filled up with my uncle's people like water filling a boot, and no one has laughed in that gallery since. I have kept his diaries, 40 years of them, in his own hand, all but the last. Why not the last? Because I have never dared to read it. It is locked. It is the only thing in this house besides myself that anyone keeps locked. A diary, said the Duke. His last one, the year he died, I have never opened, she said. I hadn't the heart for it, at 12. And then the years went by, and I could not bear to for a different reason. Because a thing unread is a thing not yet ended, and as long as I have not read my father's last words, I have not entirely lost him. She looked at her hands. It is foolish. You may laugh. I do not find, said the Duke quietly, that I have the smallest inclination to laugh. He was watching her across the candle with an expression she could not read. Keep it locked then, Miss Vane, as long as you need to. Some doors are not meant to be opened before their time. But hear something from me, since we are telling each other true things in the dark, and you may make of it what you will. He paused. My own father died when I was 19. He was a hard man, and a cold one, and he taught me that a duke feels nothing he cannot afford to have used against him, and I learned the lesson so well that I have been, by every account including my own, the coldest man in England for 15 years. I have not laughed aloud, that I can recall, in longer than I can say, and I have laughed twice tonight, in a cold, locked room, at the words of a woman I was hired to ruin. He rose and crossed to the shuttered window, and stood with his back to her, and his voice, when it came again, was very low. I do not know what to make of that, and I am a man who always knows what to make of things. So perhaps it is as well that our engagement is a false one, Miss Vane. A true one might prove more than either of us bargained for. And Isolde, watching the broad, dark shape of him against the barred window, did not answer, because she had promised to speak only true things, and the only true thing she could have said was one she was not ready to hear in her own voice. The gray light of dawn was creeping in around the shutters when they heard the sounds of the house waking, and footsteps in the passage, and low voices, her aunt's among them, sharp with anticipation. Ashworth was on his feet in an instant, and Isolde saw the warmth go out of him like a snuffed candle, and the cold Duke slide over the man she had spent the night with, until what stood by the hearth was the figure the whole county feared. Say nothing, he murmured to her, very low. Let me speak, and whatever you do, do not look surprised. Then the key turned once in the lock, and then a second time, and the door of the blue drawing-room swung open on the morning her aunt had bought and paid for. Her aunt came first, of course. Lady Prudence Vane had dressed for the occasion in her second-best morning gray, the better to look grieved and shocked before the witnesses she had assembled, and behind her crowded the whole cast of the little drama, the uncle with his weak chin and his account books, the two cousins in their bright morning gowns, come to enjoy the show, the bought footman, Corliss, white to the lips, the housekeeper, a clergyman her aunt had somehow got out of bed at this ungodly hour to make it all the more damning. Lady Prudence swept in on a wave of prepared horror, one hand pressed to her breast, the word already forming on her lips, and the word was ruin, and she got as far as the first syllable of it before her eyes found the man standing by the cold hearth, and the sound died in her throat as though a hand had closed around it. "Good morning," said the Duke. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Isolde had ever heard. She watched her aunt's face travel, in the space of 3 seconds, from triumph to confusion to the first dawning edge of a terror so complete that Isolde would have pitied her, Had she been a different sort of woman, raised in a different sort of house? 1 second. Her aunt's mouth working soundlessly. 2 seconds. The uncle's account books slipping in his suddenly nerveless hands. 3. And then Lady Prudence Vane found her voice, and it came out very small and very far from the grand accusation she had rehearsed. "Your Grace," she whispered. I cannot think how there has been some terrible mistake, some intruder. This room was to have been this room, the Duke said, without raising his voice at all, which was somehow worse than if he had, was to have been a trap, madam. Yes, I am aware. I have been aware since before I set foot in your house. I have spent an extremely instructive night in it. He let his cold gray gaze travel slowly around the assembled company, over the clergymen, over the housekeeper, over the 2 cousins whose bright smiles had frozen on their faces, and every soul it touched seemed to shrink a little. I came to Harrogate yesterday evening on a private matter of my own, which is no business of anyone in this passage. I have passed the night in conversation with your niece, Miss Isolde Vane, whom I had long wished to know better, and had until yesterday lacked the occasion. He paused, and the pause was a blade. And I am glad to tell you that this morning I have asked Miss Vane to do me the honor of becoming my wife, and she has been so gracious as to accept me. You may all, I am sure, wish us joy. If he had produced a pistol and fired it into the ceiling, the effect could not have been greater. The elder cousin made a sound like a kettle. The uncle sat down heavily upon a hall chair that no one had offered him, and Lady Prudence Vane stood in the middle of the ruin of her scheme with her mouth open and her carefully prepared horror curdling into a real one. Because she was not a stupid woman, whatever else she was. And she understood in that instant precisely what had happened. She had reached into the dark for a scoundrel to destroy her niece, and she had pulled out a duke who was going to make her a duchess, and there was not one single thing she could do about it, because to say so was to confess the entire plot aloud before a clergyman. "I," she said. "We, of course. Your Grace." What joyful? What unexpected? The Duke agreed pleasantly. Yes, I imagine it was. He turned from her as though she had ceased to exist, and held out his hand to Isolde, and drew her up out of her seat and to her feet beside him, his coat still about her shoulders, and he looked down at her with an expression that the whole passage read as tenderness, and that only the 2 of them knew for the opening move of a very long game. "My dear," he said, and the endearment was for the audience, and they both knew it, but it warmed her all the same. "You are cold, and you have had no sleep, and your family is overcome with happiness on your behalf. Let us not tire them further with our joy. I shall call this afternoon, with my attorney, to speak with your uncle about the settlements. I find I am most eager to examine the accounts." And there was nothing in the words at all, and everything in them, and she saw the uncle's face go from white to gray as he understood that the Duke was going to look at the books. He kissed her hand, there before all of them, and took up his hat, and made his bow to the room, and walked out through the parted crowd of her enemies as though they were furniture. And the whole house held its breath until they heard the great black horse go down the drive at a canter, and only then did the storm break over Isolde's head. But it was a very different storm than the one that had been planned, and she weathered it standing up. Her aunt, once the Duke was safely gone, rounded on her with a face gone ugly with fear and fury, hissing that she did not know what game the girl thought she was playing, that no good would come of setting herself above her betters, that a duke did not marry a penniless country nobody, and there would be a reckoning when he came to his senses. And And Isolde, who had spent 11 years absorbing that voice with her eyes down and her hands folded, lifted her head and looked her aunt full in the face for the first time in her life. "You locked me in a dark room to be ruined, Aunt," she said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried, and it cut through the hissing like a blade through wet paper, and every servant in the passage went still to hear it. "You paid Corliss £30 to turn the key twice. You brought a clergyman out of his bed to witness my shame, and instead you have witnessed my engagement to the first gentleman of the county. I think, on the whole, you had better wish me joy. And mean it, because the Duke is coming back this afternoon to read my father's accounts, and I should not like him to find you in an unfriendly humor. It might make him curious." She drew his greatcoat closer about her shoulders, and she walked past her speechless aunt, past the frozen cousins, past the weeping footman she found she could not hate, and she went up the stairs to her own small cold room at the top of the house, and she shut the door, and she leaned against it, and she began, at last, now that there was no one to see, to shake. The Duke came back that afternoon, as he had promised, and he brought his attorney, a dry gray man who said little and wrote much, and he was closeted with Isolde's uncle in the library for 2 hours, and when he came out his face was perfectly composed and perfectly cold, and Isolde, watching from the gallery, knew that he had found what he had gone looking for. "What did you find?" she asked him, low, at the door as he took his leave, with her uncle hovering unhappily out of earshot. "More than I hoped, and worse than you will like," he said. "The hole in the boat is not a hole, Miss Vane. It is an open seam the length of the keel. Say nothing, change nothing, trust no one in this house." "I have trusted no one in this house for 11 years, she said. "You need not teach me that lesson." "No," he said, and something in his eyes softened. "No, I suppose I need not. Forgive me, I am setting my people to work. It will take a little time to do properly, and it must be done properly, for I mean to leave your relations no crack to crawl out through. Can you be patient? Can you go on as you are, under their roof, and give nothing away, for perhaps a month?" "I have been patient for 11 years, Your Grace," she said. "I believe I can manage 1 more month." "I believe you can manage anything at all," said Ashworth, and there was something in how he said it, low and rough and entirely without performance, that told her it was not for any audience, that there was no audience, that it was simply a true thing said between the two people who had agreed to tell each other true things. And then he was gone, down the steps and onto the black horse and away, and Isolde stood in the doorway of the house that was almost hers and watched him go, and pressed her thumb hard against her palm, and did not let herself think about the thing she was beginning, against every intention, to feel. The month that followed was the strangest of Isolde's life. To the county she was the most fortunate woman in 3 counties, the nobody who had captured a duke, and the invitations that had never come now poured in for the future duchess. Her aunt, trapped, was forced to play the delighted chaperone. "You need not look so pleased with yourself," Lady Prudence hissed at her once, behind a card-room fan. "A duke does not marry a country nobody. He will come to his senses, and when he does, girl, there will be a reckoning." "Perhaps he will," said Isolde pleasantly. "And perhaps you had best pray he does not come to them until after he has finished with the accounts. Smile, Aunt, the Hartwells are watching, and you do so love to be watched." And her aunt smiled, because she had to, and hated her, and could do nothing. And Isolde, though she had every reason to enjoy her aunt's discomfort, found that she could not entirely, because a larger fear had begun to grow in her, and it was this: that the false engagement had begun somewhere in the long autumn afternoons to feel dangerously true. For the Duke called on her 2 and 3 times a week, and their courtship, mounted for the county's benefit, was conducted almost entirely in the truth they had promised each other. He would hand her into his carriage before the watching windows with his cold ducal face, and the moment the house fell behind them the face would soften, and they would talk, and Isolde came to live for those hours. He walked the acres of Harrogate with her, and let her name every field and copse. And once, standing on the low hill where her father's monument stood, he said, "I have never in my life seen a woman look at a stretch of ordinary English mud as you look at this land, as if it were a person you loved." "It is," said Isolde. "Does that seem foolish to you?" "No," he said. "It seems like the only sane thing I have heard in years. I own a great deal of land, Miss Vane, and have never once loved a foot of it. I begin to think I have been doing the whole business of owning things entirely wrong." And he did not laugh, and they stood a long while in the cold clean wind, and their hands resting side by side on the top rail of the fence were very close together and did not quite touch, and both of them were aware, to the last inch of the space between. "You are quiet today," he said to her once, in the carriage, near the end of that month. "You have been quiet a week. Something troubles you. You promised me true things, Miss Vane. Out with it." And Isolde, who had never once broken a promise, looked out of the carriage window at the bare autumn hedges going by, and made herself say it. "I am troubled, Your Grace," she said, "because we agreed that this engagement was a false one, made for my benefit, to be broken on the day I take my keys. And I find that I no longer know whether it is false, and I do not know whether you know, and I am afraid to ask you. Because you promised me you would never pretend in private to feel what you do not feel, and it would break me if the answer were that you feel nothing, and it would break me no less if the answer were that you feel something. Because I have built my whole self around wanting nothing but a lock on my own door, and you are becoming a thing I want, and I have no notion how to want a person. I have never been permitted to, and it frightens me more than my aunt's dark room ever did." She stopped, appalled at herself, her face burning. "There, you asked for a true thing. That is the truest thing I own." The carriage rolled on. The Duke was silent for so long that she thought she had ruined everything, that she had spoken past the bounds of even their strange, honest bargain, and she kept her eyes fixed on the window and waited for the cold face to come down. Instead, she felt his hand close over hers on the seat between them. "I made you a promise in the dark," the Duke answered, and his voice was not cold at all, "that I would never pretend to feel what I did not feel. I have kept it, so hear me keep it now. I did not feel nothing, Miss Vane. I have not felt nothing since the moment a locked door and a lit match showed me a woman who would not weep. I told myself it was admiration, and then I told myself it was a wager against your aunt, and then I stopped telling myself anything at all, because a man cannot lie in the dark to a woman he has sworn to tell the truth, and I had begun to lie to myself about you, and I found I could not do it and keep my honor both." He turned her hand over in his and looked at it as if it held great value. "You said you do not know how to want a person. Neither do I. My father cured me of it before I was a man. So we are two people who were taught that wanting is weakness, sitting in a carriage, wanting each other, and neither of us knowing the way of it. That does not frighten me, Isolde. That is the first thing in 15 years that has made me feel like something other than a cold house with the shutters up. I will not hold you to a false engagement, but I will ask you, on the day you take your keys and are the free mistress of Harrogate, and owe no one anything. I will ask you then, freely, to a free woman, whether you might choose to make it true. Not to escape your aunt, not to keep your land, for no reason at all except that I have chosen you, and I should like, more than I have ever wished for anything, to be chosen by you in return. And Isolde Vane, who had dreamed her whole life of nothing but a lock and a key, discovered that a heart is also a room, and that she had been keeping the shutters up on hers for 11 years, and that a man had struck a match within its dark, and she said, "Ask me now." "You have not got your keys," he said. "I have got something better," she said. "I have got the choosing of it, which is all I ever truly wanted. And I choose you, your grace, freely, for no reason but that I want to. Ask me now." And he did, there in the swaying carriage on the muddy autumn road, with no county to see it and no scheme behind it, and she said yes, and he cupped her face in both his broad hands, as if she were the most precious thing in England, and he kissed her. Once, gently, the first kiss of her life, and it tasted of cold, clean air and the beginning of everything. But there was still the matter of the accounts, and the reckoning came 3 weeks later, and it came, as such things do in that world, at a ball. Lady Prudence had insisted upon it, a great engagement ball at Harrogate, a last desperate performance of the doting family before the county, paid for out of Isolde's own rents, which was a cruelty so perfect that Isolde nearly admired it. Every family for miles came, in silk and candlelight, to the house kept so cold for its true mistress and ablaze now to impress her betrothed. And into that bright ballroom, at the height of the evening, the Duke walked with Isolde on his arm, and did not lead her to the dancing. He led her to the top of the room, and raised one hand, and the music stopped, and 400 faces turned toward him. "You have come tonight," said the Duke, in the voice that no county magistrate would contradict, "to wish my future Duchess joy. I thank you for it. But before you drink her health, there is a matter of business I find I must settle publicly, for it concerns her honor, and I will not have it whispered when it can be said aloud." He drew a folded sheaf of papers from within his coat, and Isolde saw her uncle across the room go the color of tallow. 11 years ago this lady's father died, and left her his entire estate, to be managed in trust by her uncle until her 24th year. I have spent this autumn examining that management, with the help of gentlemen far cleverer than I. I will not weary you with the whole of it. I will tell you only that in 11 years her guardian has drawn from her lands the sum of £19,000 beyond any allowance the will provided, that he has mortgaged 3 farms that were not his to mortgage, and that 4 weeks ago, finding his ward about to come of age and call him to account, he conspired with his wife to have her locked overnight in a dark room with a man they had hired to ruin her, so that she might be disgraced past inheriting and kept a dependent forever. A sound went through the ballroom like wind through wheat. The man they hired, said the Duke of Ashworth, was me. They did not know it, and so, instead of ruining Miss Vane, I have the honor of marrying her, and instead of concealing her uncle's theft, I have the honor of exposing it, before every neighbor whose good opinion he has traded on for 11 years. The magistrate is here tonight. I invited him myself. Sir, the papers are yours. It is a lie, the uncle cried, staggering up. A cruel lie. The accounts are in order. Ask anyone. Ask my own attorney, your attorney, said the Duke, has already sworn to all of it before the magistrate this afternoon, in exchange for his own skin. He is a more sensible man than you. Sit down, sir. You are making it worse, which I would not have thought possible. And the uncle sat down upon the floor of the ballroom with his hands over his face, and Lady Prudence stood beside him with her jaw working and no scheme left in the world to save her, and the elder cousin fainted, or pretended to, and no one caught her. "Is it true, Miss Vane?" a woman near the front asked, half afraid. "All of it? The locked room?" "All of it," said Isolde, and her voice was not loud, but it carried to the walls. "I was to be found ruined this morning a month past. Instead, I was found engaged. You may believe which half of the county's gossip you please. But you have heard the accounts read by the Duke himself tonight, and I think you know which half is true." She did not gloat, and she did not weep, and the whole room heard the composure of her, and understood at last that they had spent 11 years mistaking a duchess for a nobody. The Duke turned to her, in the ringing aftermath, before the whole staring county, and he took both her hands. "I told your aunt I would disappoint her," he said, low for her, though the room strained to hear. "I have done rather better. Isolde Vane, I did not choose you to spite a small man, whatever I told myself in the dark. I chose you because you would not weep, and would not beg, and gave your coat, I mean my coat, forgive me, gave a frightened boy your forgiveness with a lock still turning on you. I have 4 estates and no home. Be my home. I will spend the rest of my life striking matches in your dark rooms." And there, before all of them, she chose him back, out loud, and put her hand into his, and the county that had crossed the street from her broke into applause it did not fully understand for a match it would tell its grandchildren it had witnessed. They were married at midsummer, past her birthday, after the keys of Harrowgate had been placed by the magistrate into her own hand in her own hall, beneath her father's portrait, with no one able ever again to put her out of the room. Her uncle was not transported, for the Duke, at Isolde's asking, stayed the harsher hand of the law, but he was made to give back what could be got back, and stripped of every penny of the rents, and he and his wife went to live in a small hired house in a distant town on a small fixed sum, where Lady Prudence Vane, they said, never once smiled again, and grew old complaining to anyone who would listen of an ingratitude she could never quite bring herself to describe in detail. The cousins married as best they could, which was not well. 1 year later, on a soft summer evening, the Duchess of Ashworth sat on the rug before the fire in the long gallery of Harrowgate, where her father had once carried her on his shoulders, and in her lap lay a plain leather book, the last one, the diary she had never dared to open. Her husband sat in the chair behind her, one hand resting in her auburn hair, and their infant daughter slept in the cradle by the hearth, a scrap of a thing with storm-gray eyes. "I think," said Isolde softly, "that I am ready to read the last pages now. I could not, when I had lost everything. But I have not lost him. I have carried him with me the whole way, and now I have somewhere to bring him home to." She turned to the final entry, in her father's own dear hand, and read it aloud by the firelight. It was only a few lines, written by a dying man for a daughter of 12 he knew he was leaving. "A house is not the stone of it," she read, "nor the acres of it, but only the people it keeps warm and the strangers it treats kindly. Remember, whatever comes, that you are loved. Being loved is the one inheritance no thief can draw out of a trust." She closed the book. She did not weep, or she did, a little, but it was the good kind, and her husband's hand tightened gently in her hair, and the fire cracked, and the baby slept, and Harrowgate, warm at last in every room, kept them. If you have made it this far, then you already know how this story ends. But tell us all the same, in the comments below, which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if a woman who would not scream in the dark, and a cold man who struck a match warmed something in you tonight, then subscribe and stay. For there is always another door in this old house, and always, somewhere in the dark of it, someone about to light a candle.